moving on, they talk about Israel's ability to afford the war and then also the right to defend itself. So I want to play a clip on them talking about Israel's economy.
So our economy is actually doing quite well, I should say. And it's amazing. And you're right to ask it. But there was an economic miracle in Israel, which I'm very proud to have led. And we just have this resilient capacity, both in our economy, but also in our fighting spirit. We've gone through the Holocaust, and I'm committed, as are my people, to prevent a second Holocaust that Iran was planning. And that's what we've been doing in this war. It's taken this long because we had to break this noose of death that Iran was going to put on us in their plans to conquer the Middle East, in their plans to then proceed to Europe, and in their plans to then proceed to America. They say death to America. We're just standing in their way. And boy, did we stand in their way.
So this part of the interview, Sabby Sabs brought this up in her video, and she was really questioning PBD for bringing up money and the economy, and he was just really talking about the financial aspects of the war instead of like the human lives that are being lost. However, I do think that is a good point that she's making. Like, you should be talking about the human lives and all of the damage and destruction that is being done to the people of Gaza as a result of this war and this prolonged war against people who are defenseless. And then also, I think it is good to talk about the finances because he's basically talking about how great the economy is. So PBD was talking about the debt to GDP ratio, and I think at first it was 60% and it's gone up to 75%. Basically, this has to do with the ability to repay loans, so you want your economy to be doing well. And so they talked about how the war cost $120 to $130 billion. They talked about how they're getting $3.8 billion a year from the U.S. $30 billion of that was mostly in weapons for the war, and then they're talking about how they spent 80% of that money in the U.S. because they buy weapons from us, and then they also share intel with us and all of that stuff. He is really reiterating that this is a strong partnership between Israel and the U.S., but what he's talking about here is he's basically talking about how well their economy is doing, and if your economy is doing so well, then that naturally leads to the next question of, okay, if your economy is doing so well, why do you need so much money from us? And then is it the money that you're getting from us that is helping your economy to do well, or are you able to sustain your economy on your own without the help of American taxpayer dollars? And so I think this is a good conversation, and they didn't really dig too much into what I just said, but that would have been a great pushback question for PBD to ask, especially if your economy is doing well, and that seems to indicate that you wouldn't need as much financial support from other countries in order to, one, take care of your people in your country, but then also to be able to defend yourself. And then he also later on in the interview brings up the 5 eyes, and so he's basically talking about how, again, this is a good relationship to have between Israel and the U.S. because they give us weapons that they make, and they also give us intel. And so he brings up this alliance of sharing security and intel, and this is an alliance between 5 countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And he says, hey, we're the 6th eye. Israel is part of this alliance, and so he's really hitting home, or trying to hit home, that Israel is involved in intel sharing, and they do things to help benefit or better other countries through the information that they have to justify why they get support from other countries in regards to defending themselves from people in the Middle East. And then there's another part of the conversation that comes up where they're talking about how Israel, yes, they get a lot of financial aid, but they are the ones who are doing all of the dirty work. They're the ones who are fighting. And they talk about how they're a fighting ally, and the U.S. doesn't have to put troops on the ground in order to help with this war. We really just have to send over money, send over weapons, and all of that stuff so that they can do the fighting themselves. He also hits home, hey, we're not just fighting for us, we're fighting for you too, because if we weren't standing in their way, they would just be coming for you guys because they chant death to America. And so he's really trying to drive home the narrative, hey, we are helping you guys too. Hamas, whatever, Iran, they have to come through us in order to get through you guys. And so you guys should want us to take up this fight, basically, because we are protecting you, because if they get past us, then you guys are actually going to have to put in the work to defend yourselves from these other countries who do not like Israel, or who do not like the U.S. as an extension of us and our partnership with Israel. And then the other thing that they get into is the idea that people in Israel can just call up America and say, hey, we want this done, do it or else. And then this really ties into the whole idea of AIPAC and how they are said to control Congress, control politicians in order to implement whatever agenda that they want implemented in the U.S. that helps benefit those in Israel. And so PBD counters this by saying, no, Trump wouldn't allow this, but he thinks that other people would allow Israel to be able to control America and American politicians and all of that stuff. And then this leads them into the conversation about Hamas and October 7th, and if this would have happened if Trump was in power, if Trump was the president. So we're going to play that clip.
He's a great leader.
So going back to that, I want to clarify this again. So you said you don't know whether Hamas October 7 attack would have happened under Trump. So you're saying Hamas would have had the audacity, even under Trump, to have attacked, or no, they would have feared him?
Probably not, but it's hard to say with these maniacs. You can't quite tell. I think Iran would have been more careful, and Iran is the patron. Would they have controlled completely their client, their proxy? Maybe not. Maybe they would have, possibly.
Okay, so here in this clip, he's really reiterating that Trump would not have been controlled. He really does what's best, what he thinks is best for the American people. And then he also says that I think this is where I was getting really confused. I believe he's saying that he does not think that Hamas would have attacked if Trump had been president, but he's also saying that he doesn't quite know what would have happened. But then he's saying that Iran would have been more careful in how they decided to move if Trump was president. And so I'm a little bit confused by that. I may have to listen to that a few more times to really figure out what he was saying. But the first time that he gave his answer, I was like, I don't know what you're saying. And so that was just really confusing for me. So if you guys know or have any insight on exactly what he's speaking about, let me know in the comment section below. And then I also really like how he talked about the relationship with Biden. He talked about basically how Biden supported us, and then he basically got to this point where he's like, hey, no more, or we're gonna slap an embargo on you and all of this stuff. And so he's talking about how I guess other people came to him and said, hey, Biden's serious about this, he's going to do this. And then he was like, hey, if you want to do that embargo, basically that's not going to stop us. We'll fight with our fingernails if we have to. And so he is really setting up this idea that they are really willing to fight even if they have no support or no weapons or anything like that. If everyone is against them, they really are trying to fight for their right to live. But I don't know if they've been to that point where they're not getting anything from the U.S. at all and they truly have to fight on their own. So that is a interesting idea for him to bring up, that they are willing to fight on their own if they don't have any support and all of that stuff. But I don't know if they've ever truly been in that situation where it's just them and nothing else. They can't rely on anyone else. And so that is a interesting idea to think of. But what I think was kind of compelling with what he said was that basically Biden had a stop limit or a point that he was not willing to go past. And so that is interesting because it does give this impression that America doesn't completely and blindly agree with what you do. There are limits, there are things that we are willing to not support or things that we won't support. And so then he talked about how Trump came in, was a great American help and all of this stuff. And so who knows what the answer or the response will be when Trump reaches a point where he's saying, okay, hey, we're not going past this point and all of this stuff. So it does present this narrative that America does support Israel, but there are kind of, I guess, hard limits depending on who the president is, I guess. And so I thought that was just interesting for him to even bring that up, because that does create, and maybe this is the purpose of him bringing this up, but that does present the narrative that America doesn't just blindly support Israel. America has a mind of its own and all of that stuff. And so I don't know if you guys will think that that's true or not, but let me know what you guys think in the comment section. Okay, moving on, PBD does ask him about this joint press conference that they had, and basically this is the press conference a while back where Trump was basically talking about developing the Gaza Strip and turning it into, I guess, a opportunity for people to have jobs and just kind of take over that area and just make it something different. And so this is where a lot of people are kind of, I guess, grossed out, because we understand that there's a war happening, we understand that there's destruction, we understand that human lives are being lost, and they're talking about this as an opportunity, like a real estate deal, to just basically value the land over the lives that are being lost and the people who are sacrificing everything that they have to stay in those areas because they don't want to leave. And so just the idea of him talking about, hey, we can make money off of this, we can make it better and all of this stuff. And so PBD is asking him, like, hey, were you surprised by what Trump was saying? Because from your reaction, you look like you were caught off guard. And he doesn't actually answer the question, in my opinion. I felt like he was just going off on something else that may have been said just before that clip, but he wasn't directly responding to the clip that we saw on the screen. And I meant to go back and listen to like the full part of whatever Trump was saying to see if what Netanyahu said was actually the case of what he could have been reacting to. But in the clip that PBD showed, there didn't seem to be a relation between what Netanyahu said and then what Trump was saying. So basically what Netanyahu was saying, that he was reacting to the idea of giving Gazan people a way to leave since they were locked in. So they're talking about how they're surrounded by enemies, they can't leave, they're kind of stuck there. So the idea of give them a choice on if they want to leave and all of that stuff. And I think they don't want to leave, like that's their homeland. They don't want to be forced out and all of that stuff. And then Netanyahu says that basically Gaza exists as a base to attack Israel. It's meant for Israel's destruction. That's the only reason why it exists. And I don't know if the people in Gaza would agree with that, because they do see this as their rightful home and all of that stuff. They don't want to leave, and so they're being forced out and pushed out and all of that stuff. And so he's saying that the goal is to free Gazans from Hamas and just kind of make that like an area that's not ruled by terror. But I think other people are arguing that they just want to kind of expand their borders, and it's not really about protecting the people in Gaza, it's just about expanding Israel. And so then there comes the question of, well, okay, going back to what Trump said about Americans owning the Gaza Strip and developing it, would you be okay with that? And he says something about he's okay if the U.S., if Americans govern Gaza, but they don't raise or they don't allow the people in that area to kind of raise their kids to hate Israel or retaliate against Israel and all of that stuff. And so he says that he would be okay, I guess, if Americans own that area, if they developed it and all of that stuff. And so I guess we'll see what happens and how those words play out. But I did feel like he didn't address the question of what Trump was saying in the actual clip that was played, and he just kind of started talking about something else. And so I don't know if I'm reading that wrong, and you can let me know in the comment section below.